I must repeat what I say at the beginning of every long session. Anyone in the hearing room may use any mobile electronic device to transmit silently to the outside world what you have seen and heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after the event being described has elapsed. That is so as to fit in with the video stream via YouTube, which today is audio only, which is subject to a 10-minute delay. You may not use those devices for recording proceedings or taking photographs. Yeah.
Thank you. HM56, I want to ask you now a bit about the time you spent in the back office, some particular things from your witness statement. Can we have up, please, the statement at page 5 to 6, paragraph 16, please? Sorry, pages 4 to 5. I'm always just one out. Paragraph 16, HM56.
Yes.
It's where you say there was no formal training, which I was asking you questions about earlier. And you go on, except spending several months in the back office. Whilst I worked in the back office, I attended 2 meetings of UCOs each week. You say where they took place. And you say this: these were my opportunity to find out about what it was like for UCOs. I'll come on to the detail that follows in a moment. That suggests, doesn't it, that your learning pre-deployment took place, at least in part, through conversations or interactions with the deployed UCOs during those meetings?
I wouldn't say learning, hearing about their experiences.
And through hearing about their experiences, did you learn what it would be like to be an undercover officer deployed in the STS?
No, not really, because they were each individual in their own groups, and they were very, very, very different.
But it follows, does it, that UCOs would discuss at those meetings what was happening during their deployments?
They would recount stories, yes.
And were those discussions open in the sense of when everybody was together, including the managers?
They may or may not have been. If it was, I understand what you're saying. I think if it was relevant to the whole group, something, but it was generally, having a coffee in the kitchen or, break up. Generally, those meetings were for the management to question the guys, what they've been doing, handing in paperwork, to be made into reports and publications that they may have got. So that was the main purpose of those things. But of course, there were chats and what have you.
You say in that paragraph that you remember hearing at one of the meetings that one officer was arrested and nearly compromised. Another, who was with hunt saboteurs, was hit by a hunter's whip and roughly handled by a uniformed police officer. Do you see that?
Yes.
Later in your statement, and I'll come to the detail in a moment, you describe hearing about John Dines being arrested.
Yes.
Are you referring to John Dines there when you say, or others? And if others, don't tell me who at the moment.
I'm not sure if I do or not, to be honest with you.
The officer who was arrested with hunt saboteurs and hit by a hunter's whip, could that have been HN87? He was deployed amongst hunt saboteurs.
I think it probably was, yeah. But I don't know for sure. It's a long time ago. I don't know for sure, but it could only possibly been him. I don't know.
You say there in that paragraph that you don't recall being told who the stories related to, and you were fairly new to the unit. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does it follow from that the stories, those stories about arrests, weren't coming from the mouth of the officer who was arrested? Or do you recall that they were telling their own story?
I think in general, it's mostly their own stories they were telling.
So you remember people talking about their own arrests?
Oh, their own experiences, yes.
And how much of that, can you give us an idea how much of the meetings was spent with officers talking about their own deployments in that way? Just approximately, was it most of the meeting?
No, not at all. No.
Small parts?
There'll be other things would be coming out. The usual general chit chat between colleagues about trying to take a holiday, family problems, stuff like that. Other issues, even maybe issues with where they were living, separately, if you got what I mean.
Can I ask you now about the arrest that you heard about of John Dines in a bit more detail, please?
Yes.
And can we turn up page 27 of your witness statement to refresh your memory? Paragraph 143.
Yeah.
And you say in that paragraph, I did hear about John Dines' arrest, but I only knew about it because it occurred when I was working in the back office.
Yep.
He was arrested at a demonstration, allegedly beaten up in a police van on the way to the police station. He had carried marbles to a demonstration, and these could be used to roll under the hooves of police horses. So it's not surprising that he was arrested, having been stopped by the police. I believe Martin Gray had to go to the police station to resolve things. All of that detail, was that detail that you learned from things said in the back office, in the weekly meetings?
No, I was present when John Dines was telling the senior, they were questioning him about what had taken place.
And did that happen in the context of a group meeting?
Back office.
Back office meeting. Yeah. So he attended the back office, did he?
He did.
On his own, rather than
Yes.
with all the other officers?
Yes.
And he was speaking to the managers about his arrest?
Yeah, and they were questioning him about what had taken place.
And you were present?
I was present.
To hear what was being said?
Yes.
And that's how you learnt this detail?
Yes.
You say there that it was not surprising that he was arrested.
Yeah.
Is that because he was carrying marbles?
Yes.
For the purpose that you set out there?
Yeah, yes.
Did he say that was the purpose for which he was carrying marbles? Is that where you've got that from?
No.
He didn't say that?
No, he didn't say that, no.
So where have you got that idea from?
I got that idea because, as you said before, he was out for martyrdom. He wanted to be a Gold Star STS officer.
And what did carrying marbles to roll under horses' hooves have to do with being a Gold
Making
Star
sure
officer?
you get arrested, because you may not have been arrested and charged.
So you formed the view that he wanted to be arrested?
Yep.
And wanted to be charged?
And wanted to be beaten up as well.
And why did you form that view? What was your basis for
I just got the impression the injuries that he sustained, in my mind, were not consistent with having been beaten up in the back of a police van. In other words, they were self-inflicted, in my opinion.
So are you suggesting you didn't believe him when he said he'd been beaten up in the police van?
No, I didn't believe him, no.
What might motivate him to lie about that?
I want to be a star.
Why would that make him a star? And in whose eyes?
Why would it? Notoriety, I suppose.
But amongst who? Amongst his fellow undercover officers?
I'm not really sure. No, much wider than that, I would have thought.
Amongst his target group, so to speak, the people on whom...
I wouldn't know, but I would say in Special Branch, perhaps.
So you didn't take seriously the suggestion that the uniformed or arresting police officers might have beaten him up on the way back to the police station?
The injuries that I witnessed on his face did not resemble being battered.
What injuries do you recall him having to his face?
More sort of grazing and skin being rubbed off. No bruising as such.
We know from other records that he was arrested at the poll tax demonstration. Do you know how soon after the event you saw him?
No, I don't.
In the office?
No.
You say that you believe Martin Gray had to go to the police station to resolve things. What do you mean by to resolve things?
To disclose who had been arrested.
Do you know that to have happened, or is that your assumption that that's what Martin
In this
Gray...
case, I don't know what happened.
Did you hear discussion at any point of the fact that when he was arrested on this occasion, John Dines had given not his usual cover identity name, John Barker, but a second false name, Wayne Cadigan.
I'd never heard that before.
Were you aware of any officer, John Dines or any other of your contemporaries, having a second false identity?
Certainly not, no.
Are you surprised?
I'm trying to think why. Excuse me, but I don't get it.
Why not?
Well, I just can't see the point in it. Why? I don't get it. Why? Not unless he was arrested with somebody, and he's trying to impress the person he's with, saying, so he's not giving his name, he's giving another name. Maybe that, I don't know.
But not a practice that you were familiar with whilst in the SDS?
Well, getting arrested wasn't a practice I was familiar with either, to be honest.
The provision of a second name to use on arrest, not something that you heard about?
Never heard of it before.
What was the reaction of the managers, as far as you were able to see and hear, to the fact that John Dines had taken marbles to the demonstration?
Unwise, I think, would be the best way that I could categorise that.
As in, they thought it was an unwise thing for him
and he
to
should have
do.
known better.
Do you remember them saying that to him?
No.
That's your forming a view?
That's the impression I got, yeah.
Did they berate him? Did they tell him verbally? You should
Not
have done
in front
that?
of me. I don't know whether they did or not, but certainly not when I was there.
Was there any discussion with him on that occasion in your hearing, or any discussion more generally that you recall, about the concept of an officer acting as an agent provocateur? So encouraging others to commit crimes?
Certainly not, no. I mean, it would be contrary to the role of a police officer.
But was that discussed with you specifically as an SDS officer, that it would be contrary to the role of a police officer?
Didn't
At any
need to.
stage?
It's obvious,
Did you hear any discussion with John Dines or about John Dines in connection with having to appear in court or anything like that?
No, I don't recall, no.
Right, so confined to the arrest?
Sorry?
Confined to his arrest and the circumstances
No, I
of
haven't
his
heard.
arrest.
I didn't. After that time, I never heard any more about it.
Did you speak with him directly about it?
No.
Any reason why not?
No, just no reason to talk to him about it. I'd heard all about it, if you know what I mean, and he was doing his thing and I'm doing mine. So we might meet up, as I said, twice a week, but that's it.
Just thinking, because at that stage, when you overhear this conversation, you're in the back office, it's your chance to learn about being an undercover officer, isn't it? So I just wondered if you took an interest in the subject of an officer being arrested and what to do as a result of that.
Well, I took more than an interest. I was astounded by it, and the fact that he should, be found going equipped. Just ridiculous.
Did you discuss the fact that you were astounded? Did that cause you to discuss it with your managers to say, is this what's expected of me? Is this
No, because I know
permissible?
it's not. It wasn't expected of you.
So you had no further discussion with the managers about it?
Not that I recall, no.
The meetings that you attended, putting to one side hearing about John Dines' arrest, can I ask, was there talk by serving undercover officers in the field about individuals who they were reporting on or targeting?
What, during a meeting that we
Yeah, so during the weekly meetings when officers might talk about their own deployments, do you recall mention of prominent individuals, for example, by name?
No, I don't.
Can we call up, please, on the screen MPS 0737160, page 4. Just so that you understand what you're looking at, HM56, these are notes taken by police officers from Operation Sparkler, which was investigating an incident involving improvised incendiary devices at Debenham stores you don't need to worry about that too much. But so police officers conducting an investigation went to speak to HN 109. So the detective inspector who was the first detective inspector.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha, yeah.
And can we focus in, please, about 2/3 of the way down where the number 71 appears? And the notes of this meeting with HM 109 recalled that he stated that he was unaware of any relationships between activists and UCOs. However, there had been jokes made about high standards of intelligence being gained from, quote, horizontal politics, end quote. Do you recall jokes being made about high standards of intelligence being gained from horizontal politics or anything of the sort?
No, never.
Any jokes to the effect that having, one interpretation of that might be that having a sexual relationship with somebody would lead to gaining good intelligence? Anything of that nature discussed
No,
in
never.
your hearing?
No,
Are you sure about that?
100%.
To be fair to, because HM 109 has also given a witness statement to the inquiry, he says that's not about relationships between officers and activists, but about activists having sex with other activists. Do you understand? Did you hear anything to that effect?
No,
Going back to the document, it records him saying that the other standing joke was that a particular named female there was not very attractive. Do you remember hearing about that individual being spoken about during the meetings?
I wouldn't know because I wouldn't be able to separate the two. I know the name.
But do you remember it being mentioned at the meetings?
No, not particular. No.
Do you remember any supposed or so-called joke to that effect?
No.
Were you aware that at the time that you joined the unit, John Dines was having a relationship in his cover identity with that individual?
No, certainly not. No.
Are you sure there weren't jokes about it because it was generally known that that's what he was doing?
Certainly not. No way. No.
Can you give us a flavour of the nature of the discussions that would be had at the meeting? So you've told us a part of the meetings might involve officers talking about their deployments. Was there also an informal side to the meetings, chat about work rather than family life?
Yeah, sure. You know, the usual chit chat. You know, who's going to take promotion? What you're going to do when you leave? Who's coming on? Who's coming on? Who's going off? Because there was a general turnover. Just a general office. They call it general office talk.
Was any of that chat ever about women?
Unless it was a police officer, no. You know, you might get a new boss or something.
Any might be termed bawdy or lewd language used by the officers?
No, not in the slightest.
What about when the meetings took place at a pub? Did that change the nature of the discussions in that sense?
What do you mean? Well, with regards to women, or
Yes, for example, with regards to women, was there more likely to be
no,
lewd chat
No.
about women,
no,
anything of that nature?
no,
So you never heard anything of that nature whilst you
not that
were
I can recall.
with
No,
the
and I would have been
STS?
astounded if I had.
You would have been astounded if
Yes.
you had. Are you suggesting that the use of sexist language was not something that you would have come across in the Metropolitan Police Service in the late 80s, early 90s?
If it would have done, it would have been challenged.
Would you have challenged it?
I certainly would. Yes.
Do you think your colleagues regarded you as somebody who would challenge that sort of behaviour?
Sorry.
Do you think your colleagues regarded you as somebody who would challenge that sort of behaviour?
Yes, very much so.
You also say in your statement that whilst you were in the back office, you processed reports. That's how it's expressed. What did that involve, processing reports?
To be honest, you get names mentioned in reports, and sometimes they may have had files, specialised files. So you'd look up the file reference, and that would be included in the report. They may have just had mentions, and you'd put that in the report for the typist to include at the end of that report. So whoever's reading it knows what to refer to or back to or to minute onto.
Did you ever remove any substance, any intelligence from the report that had been submitted by the officer?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
So you received a report in the back office, presumably created originally by one of the deployed officers.
Yeah.
The processing that you refer to, would it ever have involved removing any of the content of what the officer had reported?
What do you mean?
Say, for example, did you ever make a judgment about whether the officer had properly included any information in the report, or did you simply put forward exactly what the officer
Put forward exactly what the officer had said. Yes.
And other than file references, did you ever add anything to the reports?
Certainly not.
As far as you were aware, whether carried out by you or anybody else in the office, was any assessment ever conducted as to whether the language that the officer had used was appropriate or not in their reporting?
No, never. I mean, the standard of a special arts report was you were trained in it from your first day in special arts. There's a format to those reports. There's a typical report language that's used.
What about an assessment of whether the information that was being reported had a legitimate policing purpose, so was of use to the police or not? Was any assessment being made of that? In the back office?
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't have been reported on, in my opinion, if it wasn't of use. There's nothing to say. If it's not of use to, let's say, the Commissioner of Police, then there's no point sticking it in the report.
But no assessment was made in the back office to see whether other officers had abided by that approach?
No, because you just wouldn't needed to be have done. They wouldn't write report. They wouldn't bother putting pen to paper if what they're writing about is of no use.
So as far as you were concerned, if the officer had decided it deserved to be written down,
yeah, it was going to be of some use. Yeah.
Can I ask, just before we leave the topic of discussions and meetings, that we look please at paragraph 57 of your witness statement, page 12. This is about the meetings once you were deployed,
Yeah.
but whilst I'm on the topic of meetings.
Yeah.
You say there, the bi-weekly meetings were an opportunity to put in my written reports and, if necessary, to discuss their contents in greater depth with management.
Yes.
Can you give us an idea of how common it was for officers, based on your experience, to discuss the contents of their reports in greater depth with management? Was that a regular thing or an exception to the norm?
I really don't know. I mean, I can only sort of cite examples of where it was perhaps, if there was a demonstration going to happen, then, there would be a big discussion about it with the management, but, for example, are they going to get more information? Are you going to be able to get more? Or is this it? If you follow me.
All right, so exploring whether there was more to be had from the intelligence that you were reporting, more to be gained.
More to be had, or would it become more accurate, for the day?
Were you ever tasked in those meetings to seek out particular intelligence?
Well, I wasn't. No, it was just a normal thing. I mean, if you went somewhere with your group, then you're going to report on it generally, if there's something to report on.
Can we have a look at paragraph 58, please, of your statement on a similar topic? You're still talking about the meetings.
Yeah.
So you say an informal start, and then the chief inspector would then lead the meeting and hand out police orders to read and update the group generally. There would not be any public announcements about tasking because the SDS operated on a need-to-know basis, and such matters would be dealt with by a private meeting after the general meeting.
Yeah.
Two aspects to explore there, if I may. What your reference to police orders to read and update the group generally, what are you referring to there? Can you give us an idea?
Publication that came out twice a week. It would tell you about new legislation. It would tell you about who joined the police, who died in the police, who'd retired.
And those were handed out to you at the meetings?
Yes, you had to read them, yeah.
Do you have to read them on the spot? And were you,
Well,
were
you wouldn't
watched?
get another chance. They'd be taken away.
So you were expected to read them?
Yep.
And then secondly, you say you refer there to matters being dealt with by private meeting after the general meeting. How common was it for officers, based on your observations and your experience, to meet privately with managers?
I couldn't give you a figure.
Or did it seem exceptional when it happened, or did it seem routine?
Well, sometimes you wouldn't even know it's happening. You might be, as I said, in one room having a coffee, chatting to somebody, and this discussion could be taking place in the kitchen or something. You wouldn't know. They wouldn't, it wasn't like nobody, shut the door, nobody come in. We're having a meeting, we're having a very private discussion.
So not that private, but off to one side.
Yeah, but I mean, if you saw the chief inspector and the inspector chatting to one of your colleagues, you just didn't go and stick your nose in, type thing.
Do you remember there being more private meetings with some officers as opposed to others? Are you able to give any
Well,
idea?
they certainly had more meetings than I did, for example, because of the lack of product. So, quite possibly, I may have noticed that others were. Well, it depends if there was something, as I said, something going on, like a demonstration was coming up, or something, something that needed to be opposed by a group or something. Yeah.
That would be discussed privately, are you suggesting, or amongst the group?
Well, it depends if there was tasking, if you got what I mean.
Sorry, I'm going to check the transcripts. I missed them. If there was tasking. So you would expect tasking to lead to a private meeting?
No, not necessarily. We in the branch you work in sort of silos. Even if on a squad like this desk here wouldn't talk to that desk over there, but they would. They'd have coffee together, but they wouldn't tell each other what they're doing. It was just to keep it. So if there was a leak, it could only come from a certain area.
But there was some discussion of what people were doing on their deployments when the
Sure.
group was all together.
Yes. I mean, we get a visit from a senior officer sometimes, and they want to know what we did. They go around the rooms, and what do you do?
Yeah, I think you say in your statement, I'll just turn it up, that whilst you were there, you recall one visit from the Deputy Assistant Commissioner.
Yeah.
I think would have been Peter Phelan at that stage.
No.
Does that ring a bell? No?
No, it wasn't Peter Phelan. I know him quite well. So.
But from a senior officer above the SDS.
Yeah, quite. Who was it? In fact, it wouldn't have been. He was not a special branch officer at the time, but he might have become one. He might have come in, sort of a level transfer, because he knew nothing about us.
I think you just said you remember visits from senior officers who would ask questions about what you were doing.
Yes, they would ask because they didn't know anything about it.
When you say they didn't know anything about it, are you basing that on your interactions with them when you met them? What's that based on?
Based on that, they didn't know we existed.
But how are you able to say that about somebody else, whether or not they knew the SDS existed?
I guess by their surprise at what we did. If they knew if they had known that we existed, they would have known what we'd done, or doing.
Right, so it's based on that they seemed surprised to be finding out what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so the visit that you recall from the senior officer, you recall that officer asking the field officers questions about what they were doing in the field.
No, not so much that. What group you were in.
So they were asking questions about the groups officers were deployed into.
Yes, yeah.
I think you mentioned, just before I move off of that, the phrase you use in your witness statement is that the senior officer stayed for a cup of tea and heard the weekly report.
Yes.
What does the weekly report mean in that context?
That general discussion, well, what have you been doing this week, HN, whatever, and what have you been doing, and what have you been doing, and that would come out, and you might produce your leaflets or your newspaper and stuff like that, yeah.
But does it follow from that phrase, weekly report, that at each of these meetings there would be a sort of round robin where each officer would say, this is roughly what I've been doing this week?
Only if they had something to say.
And by something to say, do you mean a specific event, a standout event?
I did this or this happened.
Might this happen include an arrest, for example? Was that discussed?
Well, if there had been, we'd have known about it, yes.
Can I move away from the weekly meetings now, please? I'm going to move towards your actual deployment, but starting with the very beginning and asking you some questions about your cover accommodation.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at page 9 of your witness statement, paragraph 39? And you explain there that your landlords at your cover accommodation were a Jewish family.
Yeah.
When you chose that cover accommodation, were you aware that you were going to deploy into the BNP?
Yes.
And you were aware, presumably, that amongst the views expressed by the BNP were and are, to the extent they exist, anti-Semitic?
Yes.
Did you consider that there was any risk to the family in you, a professed supporter of the BNP, living in their premises?
No, because only I knew that they were Jewish.
You did you tell them that you were a BNP supporter?
I didn't tell them I was a police officer either, no.
So they didn't understand that in your cover identity you were a supporter of the BNP?
No, certainly not.
Were you aware of the fact that they were Jewish from the outset when you rented the property, or did that become clear to you after you'd made the
It
decision?
became. I used to go and pay rent and stuff, and I think I was there for a meal as well. They were very, very kind people, and offered me, what are you doing, and would you like to come for a meal? I went for a meal.
So you had some social interaction
Indeed,
in your
yes,
cover
yes,
identity
yes.
with the landlords.
They came to the flat when I had a problem one day, and they came and fixed it.
And did it occur to you at any stage then that they might be at risk of some sort of harm?
No.
If those you were associating with in the BNP came to understand that they were
Well, they
Jewish?
wouldn't. There was no way they could come to understand that my landlord was Jewish.
Why do you say that, since it became obvious to you?
It became obvious to me because I went to their house.
You, in your witness statement, you mention elsewhere, not in this paragraph, and I think you said it earlier, that two members of the BNP came to your cover address
Yes.
after you applied to be a member.
Yes.
Did you consider any risk arose from their being at the address?
What, to the landlord, you mean?
Yes.
No, I didn't consider that at all.
Do you think there was a risk?
No.
Why not?
There's no way they could link the two. They didn't know who my landlord was.
You say in this paragraph on the screen, paragraph 39, that a
Yeah.
manager came to look at the flat
Yeah.
and agreed it was suitable.
Yeah.
Again, no name, just a cipher.
Yeah.
Which manager? Was it
I think-
the choices you have from the managers you've told us about so far are HN109,
Yeah.
HN86,
No.
or Martin Gray?
I think it was HN86.
I think you say that later on in your statement. You say he visited you once to check up on you.
Yes.
Is that the same
Yeah,
visit?
same thing.
Just
yeah.
one visit?
Yeah, the whole thing, yeah.
And why did you understand that HN86 was coming to check on you in your cover
Right.
address?
At the time, I didn't really know what he was up to. It became apparent later
When did it become apparent?
when they asked me to do something stupid. Yeah.
Right, so towards the end of your deployment.
Yes.
And we'll come back to the end of your deployment in more detail later. But why did you, when you did realise, what did you understand was the purpose of HN86 coming to your cover address then?
To make sure I was telling the truth.
About?
My deployment.
What about your deployment?
Well,
in
where I
particular?
lived, what I did, where I was going, who I knew, and stuff like that.
Did you understand that sort of check to be something that was carried out routinely for all officers?
Certainly not. No, I didn't. I don't think it was. Although it might have been for him, if you get what I mean, not for the guys. Maybe he'd done it before. I don't know, but it wasn't. I didn't think it was routine.
When HN86 visited your cover flat,
Yeah.
are you able to say whether HN86 appreciated that you were renting from a Jewish family?
No, I don't think it was mentioned. There was no need to mention it, really.
I'm going to move on then to your deployment proper. Firstly, your specific tasking. Can we look, please, at page 11 of your witness statement, paragraph 48? Actually, sorry, can we start with paragraph 50 on that page? And you say there, HM56, that you had significant discretion in how you operated throughout your deployment.
Yes.
Did that discretion extend to what you reported on? So it was in your discretion what made its way into your written reports?
Well, I suppose it must have, yes, but you would have reported on anything, really, that was going on that was of interest to the police.
If we have a look at paragraph 48, which is where I was going to start, you do say that I was not specifically tasked to do anything or provide particular information. And then a bit later on, it was left to my common sense and judgment as an experienced special branch officer.
Yeah.
So is that accurate in terms of how you understood what it was you were expected to report or not to report on?
Yes, I'd say so, yeah.
You also say there that was unlike the special branch generally, where the direction was set by senior special branch officers, etc.
Yeah.
So the amount of discretion you had about what to do and what to report was much greater, was it, on the SDS than in your usual special branch work?
Could you repeat the question again?
Yes. Was the amount of discretion you had as an SDS officer
Yeah.
in terms of what to report and how to go about your task greater than the amount of discretion you had as a special branch officer more widely?
Yes, in some ways, yes.
In what ways?
Well, things that may not have been of interest. Well, on the desk, you're not just looking at one. You're not focused just on one thing. You might have numerous organisations to look at.
But in the SDS,
You
how does that mean you had more discretion in the SDS rather than less?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
How was it that you had more discretion?
Well, because you were there, or that you reported on whatever you felt needed reporting on, rather than this, and this.
Can I just ask you to look at another bit of your statement to see how these things fit together? Paragraph 55 on page 12, please. You say there, you repeat, my deployment was mostly exercising my own discretion whilst I was deployed. But then you say, I did not report on any matters that I had not been specifically tasked to obtain intelligence on, which seems slightly at odds with the idea that what you reported was at your own discretion. Which is the correct?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think it's at odds. I just think I reported on the unit that I was operating in, and there was. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of something which would come to my notice, which wasn't specifically required. I really can't think of anything at the moment.
All right. So as far as you were concerned, when you say specifically tasked to obtain intelligence on, do you mean your understanding was that you were tasked to obtain intelligence on the BMP in Loughton,
Yes, yeah.
rather than something more detailed?
But if it had come to my knowledge, I would have reported on it.
Whether or not someone had asked you for it?
Yeah, quite. Say
Thought
somebody,
it was worth reporting.
say somebody else had visited from another unit, and made themselves known. Say we've been in the pub. Oh, this is so and so from Chingford, for example, you mentioned earlier. Then I would have made a note of it, and it would have been reported on.
And that was your decision rather than anybody else's?
Oh, very much so. Yes.
Did you ever get any feedback from your managers about whether the contents of your reports were considered to be useful or not useful?
No, not really.
You describe in your witness statement that you started your deployment off by going to a pub in Loughton most evenings, which was considered to be the local for members of your target group. And then after some time, you applied, 2 members of the target group came to your flat. That you describe that episode of 2 BNP members coming to your flat as a sort of unofficial vetting visit. Is that a fair description of it, if I call it that?
I wouldn't have thought so, to be honest, no.
What did you understand the purpose of that visit to be then?
To see who I was and to see where I lived, I suppose.
Did you feel prepared for that, to have members of your target group turning up at your cover address?
Well, certainly after I put in the application, yes.
Can we have a look at some of your early reporting on the group?
Yeah.
If we start, you submitted 3 reports dated the 7th of August of 1990, which appear to be the earliest reports.
Yeah.
Can we start with UCPI 022203? That is your C2, sir. All right, and there are privacy redactions over names and identifying details, HM56, but you reported on a name is an active member of the Epping Forest unit of the BNP, regularly participates in the Saturday morning street sales of BNP publications at the Broadway Debden, and assists in the weekly canvassing and leafleting of the local area. And then you went on to describe his employment, his self-employment, the details of his van, and a physical description of him. Can I ask, what was the purpose of reporting the van registration details and the physical description of the person?
The purpose is because it's a van that can carry people.
And what significance does that have?
Well, when they attended other demonstrations and things like that, if you saw the van would have been noted. It would have been, possibly, I would hope, would be given out to other, possibly special branch officers from the desk. So if they saw that van, they know where it had come from, and possibly it contained more than just one person.
Might they not have known that a van would contain more than one person just by looking at it?
Go into that demonstration.
Could we take that down and have a look, please, at UCPI 022204? It's your C3, please, sir. Same date, HM56, you appear to have submitted an article, a photocopied article from the July edition of the British Nationalist. Paragraph 3 sets out what the article states in summary. And then you add some information about this individual's decision to leave the United Kingdom and his views and relationships in connection with a wife of a foreign nationality. The first part of the report, the reporting on an article in the paper, that was information that could have been obtained otherwise than through an undercover officer, wasn't it? Sorry, did I miss?
Sorry, what was the question?
The article from the edition of the British Nationalist, that was information, wasn't it, that could have been obtained without the use of an undercover officer, simply by obtaining the publication?
Quite.
The second part of the report, which comments on this individual's decision to leave the United Kingdom, is that information that you obtained through others?
I have no
directly?
I have no idea. And I have to say, I do not recall this at all.
Looking at it now,
Yep.
the nature of the information reported in paragraphs 4 and 5, what did you understand to be the sort of purpose or the utility of that to the police, of that sort of information?
I have no idea. I actually don't recall this report.
Whether or not you recall it,
Yep.
bearing in mind what you said about it being up to individual SDS
Yes.
officers to decide, to make decisions about the worth of the information, can you discern any utility in this information now to the...
Well, only the fact that he's leaving, perhaps, and somebody's going to have to fill his position.
Can we take that down? That's just 2 examples out of 3 reports dated the 7th of August of 1990. So we take it from that you were deployed and in the field by August, certainly, to have been able to submit reports.
Mm-hmm.
There's then a gap in the reports located by the inquiry until the 16th of October of 1990. So a gap of about 2 months between your first set of reports and your next one. In your witness statement, you say that gap is explicable by the fact that there was a period of inactivity at the BMP in Loughton. Do you recall?
I don't. I
All
can't,
right,
I can't give you an explanation for that.
All right, let's put up your witness statement, please. Page 16, paragraph 76. Right, and we'll come to the report, but you say, I've been shown a report dated the 16th of October 1990. There was a gap between my reporting because there was a period of inactivity in the BMP at Loughton at that time. There was no intelligence to report. During this time, I remained undercover and developed my legend. Do you see that?
Yep.
So nothing worth reporting appears to have been happening between August and October of 1990. And as a result, you didn't submit any written reports. That's your explanation for the gap? Is that right?
I would say so, yeah. I'd agree with that.
Was it already clear to you by this period between August and October that you had deployed into a moribund branch of the BMP?
Very much so.
Did you discuss that with your managers and say, I appear to be in a place where nothing much is happening?
There were discussions right from the beginning in that, as we spoke about, with buying the newspaper and not filling in the application to join the party. Whereas, they said, well, we don't want you to do that.
But specifically with regard to the fact that you were deployed into let's call it a branch of the BMP, for want of a better word, a branch when nothing much seemed to be happening. Was there any discussion specifically about that and whether that was the right place for you to be for a long-term undercover deployment?
No, there was not.
Can I ask, please, that we look at a document briefly? It's UCPI 030699. So it's your B10. And this is another one of those notes, HM56, recording a visit between SDS managers and the security service. Do you follow? And this one taking place on the 18th of September 1990, so during that gap in your reporting. And if we look at paragraph 4, regarding, under the heading British National Party, F2, which is a reference to security service personnel, F2 suggesting that the 1990 list of registered branches and groups might be of help to the SDS. I gave them the sanitised version at Annex C for possible assistance with their new BMP agent HM56. Do you recall seeking out assistance of that nature or being provided with assistance of that nature?
Nope.
Did you consider that you needed assistance in terms of identifying branches or groups of the BNP?
No, because it was the decision of the management as to where I would be best placed. It was not a decision for me.
So was that information passed on to you as far as you can recall?
No, it certainly was not.
Can we turn then, please, to the next report that you submitted, which is dated the 16th of October 1990. It's UCPI 022205. It's your C4, sir, in the hard copy bundle. And this is your report, HM56, on the national rally that took place at Limes Farm Hall in Hainault in October 1990.
Yep.
If we have a look, please, we start at paragraph 4. I just want to ask you a number of questions about the contents of this report.
Yep.
So you reported that the meeting commenced at 3:30, was chaired by Dave Bruce, who was the national organiser, and gave the opening address. And we see him explaining about halfway down the paragraph, 3 locations had been prepared for this year's rally as they expected that, as in past years, attempts would be made to sabotage their arrangements. In the event, he said that the more central locations had been indeed sabotaged, as was more or less expected, and thankfully their forward planning in providing for a third now allowed the rally to proceed. Had you been aware in advance that the plans for this meeting had involved the possibility of 3 locations?
No.
If you had been, presumably it's information that might have been useful to the police and you would have reported it.
Well, only that it might stop them wasting their time if they chose to cover that location in case of trouble.
Hainault in Essex was quite close to your deployment in Loughton, wasn't it?
If you say so.
Was it just a coincidence that the national rally took place close to where you were deployed that year, as far as you were concerned?
Could you answer that question again, please?
Yes. Was it just a coincidence? So what we're looking at here is a report of the national rally of the BNP, so a national party-wide event by the looks of it. It says 350 people attended.
Yeah.
And it took place, in relative national terms, just around the corner from where you were deployed, more or less.
I see. Yeah.
Was that just a coincidence that
I
you
think it's more to do with Dave Bruce, who didn't live too far away either.
So it was
Convenient for the national chair, or whatever you want, national organiser.
Understood.
He probably knew that area far better than anybody else.
But you didn't know when you deployed that was going to happen?
I went to these locations one after the other.
Sorry, say that again. You went to
those locations. The only way you could arrive at number 3 was by going to number 1, number 2, and then every time you turned up and said, no, it's not here, go there. So you got back in your car and you went there, and they said, no, it's not here, go there. So you didn't know when you were going to get there, if it was going to be there or not.
Understood. So you ended up here by following through the route that the BNP directed you to.
Yes.
Can we zoom out, please, and have a look at some of what the speakers said? Paragraph 6 on the next page, please. This is the East Midlands organiser speaking. Yeah. And about almost halfway down the paragraph, it says this: he then reported difficulties with the police who, he now said, seemed no longer impartial and were actively engaged in disrupting BNP activities in his region. Mm-hmm. Their explanation, he said, was that in their opinion the BNP's only objective was to, quote, wind up the ethnics, end quote. An opinion, he said, which showed a total disregard of the real message of the BNP, love of your own country and people first. He lamented the taking of sides by the police, especially, he said, as they had taken the wrong side. So the implication of what was being said by the BNP at this national rally was that the police had previously been perhaps less willing to intervene in the activities of the far-right groups like the BNP, but there had been a change of attitude. To what extent did you agree that what he was saying was accurate from your point of view in the Metropolitan Police?
I have no idea. I had no experience of the police dealing with the BNP at all.
Based on your own personal experience of serving in the Metropolitan Police, had you discerned a change of attitude within the police, moving from perhaps more sympathetic to the right wing to less sympathetic?
No, because I wouldn't have noticed. I was not in the general police environment. I was in Special Branch.
Right. Well, Special Branch was concerned with political groups, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did you discern any change of attitude within Special Branch?
I wasn't dealing with the right wing or fascism in Special Branch, so I could not comment on that, I'm afraid.
Did you do you agree with what was said by the BNP there, that there was a lack of impartiality amongst the police when it came to policing right-wing groups like the BNP?
I have no idea, I'm sorry. I don't.
Just looking at the aims of the group and the nature of the group, their ethos, as it's expressed there as love of your own country and people first, it was white nationalism, white supremacy, wasn't it, in essence?
I think so, yes.
And you say in your witness statement you don't think their aims were subversive.
I don't
that
think
right?
they knew what the word meant, to be honest.
Whether or not they knew what word to use, you didn't take them to be about subverting the parliamentary democratic system. They were in fact engaging in some elections, weren't they? Local
Yes,
elections
they were,
at
yeah.
around that time.
Yeah, yes.
But in your statement you described them as criminal. Their aims were criminal and likely to lead to public disorder.
Yes.
The ethos of white nationalism, white supremacy, was that an ethos that found favour, to your knowledge, with any of your colleagues in the Metropolitan Police Service?
No, not at all.
Within the SDS?
Certainly not.
Was there any sympathy, as far as you could discern, for the view expressed here by the BNP that the police were taking the wrong side by policing groups like the BNP or taking an interest in them?
No, not at all.
Can we look at paragraph 7, please? The next speaker is listed there as Tony Wells.
Yeah.
Did you know Tony Wells by any other name?
No.
Did you know or suspect that he might be identical with Tony Lacoma, who was later deputy leader of the BNP?
No.
Were you aware of any involvement in criminality by this individual?
No, it's the first time I ever saw him. I never saw him again.
Can we have a look, please, at the next paragraph, paragraph 8? We see the speaker there is named... Just wait for it to stop moving.
It's okay.
Thank you. We see a speaker, Steve Smith, described as having recently stood in the by-election for Park Ward in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets.
Yeah.
It describes himself as having previously been involved with the National Front. Were you conscious of reporting on individuals, however abhorrent their views might have seemed, who were taking part in the democratic process by standing in by-elections?
In what way? I'm sorry.
Did you consider it permissible to be reporting on activities of individuals who were engaged in trying to be elected?
Yes, I did, because they would draw opposition, and often that would be violent.
And was that just because it was a BNP candidate, or would
It would have been because it was... Well, I mean...
would it have applied, say, to somebody standing to be a member of Parliament for the Conservative or the Labour Party?
No, not at all, no.
So it was because he was associated with the BNP
And the BNP attracted violent opposition.
and used violence themselves?
Yes, apparently so, yes.
You reported on his the speech that he made. It's about a third of the way in. You say this. Do you see? He then sneeringly spat out the following personal observations of the decline. You see that?
I do know, yeah.
And what he went on to say was explicitly racist stuff,
Yes.
wasn't it? A bit further down, the speaker, Steve Smith, stated that obviously a large proportion of the police understood the sentiments, if not supported the BNP. Did you understand the sentiments that he was expressing?
No, not in the slightest.
Did you have the impression that any of your colleagues in the Metropolitan Police Service understood or sympathised with the sentiments?
No, not at all.
Were you ever aware of any fellow Metropolitan Police Service officers being members of the BNP?
I don't know if they were a member of the BNP. I remember a magazine, and on the front of the magazine, they definitely weren't. They definitely were not BNP. It was a magazine, and people were in uniform, and one of them was a police officer at my police station.
And by a magazine, do you mean a magazine from a far-right group?
Yes, it was definitely a far-right group, yeah.
And was that just a coincidence that you recognised?
Well, he was a colleague. And I think he may have brought the magazine in, and I then remember he got swifted off. Sorry, he was picked up, taken away.
And was that before you were in Special Branch?
Oh, yeah, long time, yeah.
And what was the general reaction amongst colleagues to him bringing in a magazine in which he appeared as a member of a far-right group?
Well, I just thought it was a bit sort of childish, parading around in uniforms, thinking it was some sort of legitimate organisation group type thing. I don't think there was any sort of political stance taken on it, other than, just there was a word for it. But it's stupidity, really. I just couldn't see the point in it.
So no abhorrence, no distaste expressed for the fact of his involvement in a far-right group?
Well, I don't think anybody really understood that, the either left-wing or right-wing politics at that sort of level. Anything beyond the Conservative and the Labour, you might as well forget it.
You would have understood, though, wouldn't you, that something like the British National Party or the National Front or groups associated with them were considered to be far-right, wouldn't you?
Not when I first joined in the police, no. I knew nothing about them.
In Special Branch, certainly that was understood, wasn't it?
Well, not everywhere, no. If you had no dealings, like I've told you, I had no dealings with the National Front before I was placed on SGS. I couldn't have told you anything about them whatsoever.
You couldn't have identified them as a group on the far right of the political spectrum?
Probably, but not. I couldn't. If you'd have said, well, what do they stand for, I couldn't tell you.
Turning back to this speaker, having said that his view was that a large proportion of the police understood sentiments, if not supported the BNP, he went on as follows: if these officers did not soon cast off their uniforms and throw in their lot with the BNP and join in the struggle for racial purity, they would find themselves the targets of BNP wrath when it finally achieved power. A hypothesis which was greeted by almost deafening agreement in the form of applause by the audience. You were sitting in that rally, at that meeting, in your cover identity, but in your real identity, you were yourself a police officer.
Yeah.
How did you feel sitting through that?
I got up and applauded.
And
But how did I feel?
How did you feel?
I just thought it was a ridiculous statement.
Did you feel at risk at all?
In
The event that they realised you were a police officer?
Sorry?
In the event that they were to realise that you were a police officer infiltrating them,
Yeah.
did you think there would be any risk to you?
Sure, yeah.
Did you discuss that with your managers at any stage?
No, I think that's general for anybody infiltrating any of the organisations that we did on SGS, not just me.
but even an organisation that was expressing themselves or saying that police would find themselves targets of BNP Roth when it finally achieved power, that didn't give you additional cause for concern?
No, not really.
You say, and we could take that down, you say in your witness statement that you recall being asked on one occasion if you would be interested in standing as a candidate in the local elections. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Do you remember when in your deployment that happened, whether it was towards the beginning or the end?
To put it into context for you, I used to read the Times while sat in the pub and became known as that guy that reads the Times, sat on that chair. I sat in the same place, read the Times. They thought I was a bit of an intellectual, and hence I might be able to understand what was going on in the local council. And that is the only reason that my name popped up.
When that was discussed with you, did you talk to your managers about it?
I mentioned it, yes.
And what was their reaction?
We all had a good giggle.
Why?
Because it wasn't going to happen.
What would you have done if you had been invited with some seriousness or some serious intent
I would have laughed.
to be a candidate?
It wasn't going to happen, no way.
Did you see any particular reason, not to accept that invitation in your cover role?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'd have been lying. The whole thing would have been a lie.
And that was a view you understood to be shared by your managers, was it?
Yes, indeed.
It was a risk, wasn't it, being deployed into a group like the BNP, which was standing candidates in election, that you might find yourself in that position?
I don't think they were at the time. In fact, no, I don't think anybody knew what they were going to be doing.
Well, we've just
And
seen a speaker.
I don't know whether they actually did it anyway. I don't recall them ever putting up a candidate where I was.
Well, we've just seen a speaker at the national rally, Steve Smith,
Oh, yeah, him.
who had
Yeah,
stood in a by-election in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah, I do beg your pardon. When they were talking about the council, they were talking about Loughton, not anywhere else. It wasn't anywhere else they were talking about.
But you didn't know that Loughton was going to be a moribund branch before you deployed into it. So there was a risk, wasn't there, that you would deploy into a branch that would actively look to field candidates and might alight upon you?
I think it's a heck of a jump, to be honest. No, I mean, it was that never came up.
So you didn't anticipate that?
Certainly not, no.
Can we, just go back to the report? I'm sorry, I asked you to take it down prematurely. It's UCPI 022205. Just one more question, HM56, about the contents of that report.
Mm-hmm.
Can we go straight to page 5, paragraph 12, please? And this is part of a speech by, can we go up to the beginning of the paragraph of 12? Sorry, my fault. The party chairman, John Tyndall, gives the final speech. Thank you. And can we go to the next page? So towards the bottom of paragraph 12, and towards the end, the last couple of sentences, Tyndall said that Sir Peter Imbert was no more than a puppet dancing to the tune of the British Board of Deputies. That's a Jewish organisation, isn't it? He said that Imbert, having recently been summoned to appear before the board, later stated that he would, quote, wipe racism off the streets, end quote. By racism, Tyndall said he means us, the BNP. Was the direction set by Sir Peter Imbert as set out there, to your understanding? Was it to wipe racism off the streets, which included the BNP?
I have no idea. I don't know what Sir Peter Imbert said. I certainly don't know what his intentions were.
Thank you. Can we take that down, please? And can we pull up UCPI 022206? It's at your C6, sir. HM56, this is your report on the march and rally that took place in Bethnal Green under the slogan Rights for Whites in November of 1990. Do you recall how you came to be in attendance at this march?
I think so. I think one of the members said, there's going to be a march. Are you coming?
So invited to come along
Yep.
by someone in Loughton branch?
Yes.
In your witness statement, you say that what you did on this occasion was to march along and hang around.
Yes.
Is that a fair summary of what you did?
Yes.
Did you have any cause to have to avoid getting involved in violence or disorder on this date?
No, I didn't have to avoid it. I watched it, but I didn't have to avoid it.
Yeah, I think you say in your witness statement you saw someone from the BNP punching an individual associated with a left-wing organisation.
Yes.
And you didn't report that here in your written, to the police at the time.
I didn't need. Well, if I could explain how it went, there was a whole group of left wing, whoever they were, and they were covered by uniformed police officers, and this BNP person, I don't know his name. I presumed he was in the BNP. I've never met him before, never seen him before or after. Was talking to a police constable, and every time this police constable turned away, he just punched someone in the crowd like that behind his back. So there was no point in me trying to report it. I presumed that the person in the crowd would have said to the police officer, he just punched me in the head. But I didn't see any action being taken by the constable.
Right, but you were a police officer who'd witnessed a crime, in effect.
Yes, indeed, yes.
And so your evidence might have been useful had there been a prosecution, for example.
Yes, it might have been, yes.
But you didn't think that you ought to report that?
No, because...
To make it known that you were there
no,
and a
because
witness?
there may have been a crime. I mean, whether it was a common assault, an actual bodily harm or grievous bodily harm, I could not tell.
But whatever the crime was, isn't really the point, is it, HM56? The point is that you were a police officer
Yes.
witnessing what appeared to be a crime.
What appeared to be a crime, yes.
And you might have useful and reliable evidence to give if there were a prosecution.
Yes.
But you didn't consider that it was part of your role to make that known?
I did consider it.
And why did you choose not to?
Well, because there was no specific evidence. I saw what I saw. I couldn't see any activity by the police constable, so therefore I presumed that the person had not made a complaint.
And so the lack of a complaint affected your...
Well, not only the lack of the complaint, I didn't see who he'd hit. You're talking about maybe 50 metres away. I didn't see who he hit. I just could see him throwing a straight right, and I couldn't see who he'd hit. There was certainly no interaction with the policeman, so I thought, well, there's no complainant.
If you had been a uniformed officer in attendance at that event, would you have taken a different approach?
Yes, of course. I'd have gone round and had words with the constable for a kick-off, and then tried to find whoever was in the crowd if they'd been injured.
So as a deployed undercover officer with the SDS, would it be fair to say you saw yourself in quite a different role from a police officer not undercover?
To a certain point, yes.
And one of those points might be not to involve yourself if you saw what appeared to be a crime of that nature being committed?
To a degree, yes.
Was there any sense amongst the SDS when you were part of it that as undercover officers you were somehow above or beyond the usual rules or the usual laws and principles that applied to police officers?
No, not at all. I just think, you had more considerations than if you'd been in uniform. Or indeed, an ordinary special branch officer.
Can we just scroll down on this report, and a leaflet's attached to it, and can we have a look, please, at page 4 of the leaflet? Page 4, which is the leaflet, I should say. And can we scroll up? We see issued by National Headquarters, so it's a leaflet about the march that was to take place on November the 24th. If we just scroll up, please. Thank you. We see it was issued from a PO box, a post office box in Welling in Kent. Did you become aware during your deployment that there was a BMP centre, headquarters, bookshop, whatever you want to call it, situated in Welling?
No.
You didn't become aware of that
No.
or its activities at all?
No.
Thank you. Can we take that down, and can we look now, please, at MPS 0743944. It's C5. So. And I want to ask you to look at this, please, HM56, as an example of, it's got telephone message at the top. Do you see it's purports to be from the Detective Chief Inspector of the SDS, Mr. Gray, to the Chief Superintendent of C Squad, dated 23rd of November 1990. And it's providing information about the demonstration to take place the next day. So dated the 23rd of November and about the demonstration the next day that you attended.
Yes.
I think you say in your witness statement that you submitted intelligence by telephone very rarely.
Yes.
But do you recognise this as the sort of product that might have come from your telephone reporting?
If that was going to be the next day, then yes.
And you may be anticipating my question, but why would you report information like this by telephone rather than by a written report?
Well, because it would have needed to be acted upon immediately, and like that, a special branch message can be minuted and off it would fly, rather than waiting for somebody to write a report, to stick the references on it, and et cetera, and attached to a file and gone.
So a speedier way to communicate intelligence about an event happening the next day.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And then finally, from your reporting, can I ask that we put on the screen UCPI 022208? It's C8 in your hard copy bundle, sir. This is a report dated the 30th of November of 1990. And you report, HM56, that among the 6 members or supporters of the Epping Forest unit of the BNP who attended the, quote, Rights for Whites march in the East End on Saturday, 24th of November 1990, was a person who was identified as Rod, and you now give further identifying details of that individual, do you see? So we've got a full name, in the next paragraph, an approximate year of birth, height, build, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
References to him attending kickboxing classes,
Yep.
that his girlfriend's in Woodford Green, commenting that he doesn't appear to be prone to violence, his car, etc., etc. Can you explain why you reported these sorts of personal details on individuals you came across?
Because that's what I would do with any member of the BNP.
But why?
Because I presumed that whoever would want to know who is in the BNP and what their attitude was to or whatever, what they believed in, if you get what I mean.
This individual you commented did not appear to be prone to violence. Did you consider it to be justified to report on somebody merely because they were a member of the BNP,
Yes.
if they weren't prone to any violence?
Yes, I did.
And can you just explain why?
Why? Because they could be used for other things.
What does that mean?
Well, that means, I don't know, really. It means they could be used to transport people. They could be used to carry things for other people, something like that.
Again, accepting that you were reporting on the BNP, but just to draw a parallel,
Yes.
another party standing in local elections, would you have considered it justifiable to report on their car, their girlfriend, their hobbies, their physical description? Or was it because of the association with the BNP
Purely the
opposed
BNP.
to another political
No, purely the BNP.
organisation?
It would not have been acceptable, no.
Right, I'm going to move away from your reporting and your deployment to look at how your deployment came to an end. Can I just check before I do, if the stenographer's happy, I'll carry on and wait for a break, or would it be better to have a break in the middle of the afternoon? I would say no less than 25 minutes before I get to a different topic. Okay, thank you. I have the nod to carry on. Can we bring up, please, onto the screen, first of all, UCPI 030701. It's your B11, sir. And we've another note here, HM56, of a meeting between SDS managers and the security service. Do you follow? This visit on the 30th of November of 1990. So by this time you were, or were you, as far as you can recall, a member of the BNP? So this is just after the march and rally.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So you would have been a member. Were you a member of the BNP nationally or a member of the BNP Loughton branch, if there was a difference?
I don't know whether there was a difference or not. I would say nationally, but that.
But you were considered a member and you considered yourself a member?
Yeah.
Right. Can we have a look at paragraph 8, please? It's at the top of page 2. The meeting between the managers and the security services recorded in this way. Their new agent, there being the SDS in this context, their new agent HM56 against the BNP has had a frustrating time trying to get himself into BNP. Repeated promises to contact him have not been followed up. Now, I may know the answer to this given what you've already told us, but to what extent do you consider that to be an accurate description of the state of your deployment as at the 30th of November of 1990?
Well, I think it's a bit late, if you get what I mean. This was much earlier. Maybe that had been related to whoever wrote this report and he put it in the context of November, but I think it happened much earlier on.
Right, so that would be an accurate description of an earlier time in your deployment?
Yes, indeed. Yes, very much so, yeah.
And the way you explained it earlier was that you had wanted to apply for membership,
Yep,
but your managers had asked you not to, or told you not to.
that's right.
This suggests that repeated promises to contact you, presumably by the BNP, had not been followed up.
That's right.
Was that the case?
Yes, in the sense of, I was meeting them every week, the newspaper sellers, and trying to engage them in deep, meaningful conversation about any subject. And, contact, not to join, this was contact. So there was no linkage, to me meeting them and going any further, if you get what I mean.
All right, so no follow-up in the sense of becoming closer to being a member?
No, because I spoke to them, when I did fill it in, and they did come round. They sort of said, well, we couldn't understand why you used to turn up every week. If you were that interested, why didn't you fill in the bloody form?
So they seemed surprised that it had taken you so long?
Yes, indeed, very much so, yeah.
Can we take that down and look at another note of a meeting with the security service, this one on the 7th of March 1991, so a few months later. UCPI 030704, that's your B12, sir. Thank you. And we're going to look in particular, please, at paragraph 9 and 10, paragraphs 9 and 10. Thank you, on page 2. And this note of the meeting with the security service records that you had asked to be withdrawn after only 10 months in the field, just as you were starting to get into the BNP. Right, and then paragraph 10, Gray amplified what he thinks is the reason behind it. HM56 had become increasingly frustrated at the long time it was taking him to get noticed by BNP, due, it seems, to a dilatory local branch secretary. Then, just as he was making successful contact, he had to temporarily come out, reorientate himself back to civilian life, and there's a gist there of some redacted information that you had to spend some time away from your SDS deployment for personal and professional reasons. And then on return, at the end of February, you'd said you wanted to jack it in. To what extent do you agree with the accuracy of what is recorded there as having been said by Detective Chief Inspector Gray?
I don't agree with it at all.
I'll come on to what you say about how you came to be withdrawn in your witness statement. Before I do that, you also say in your witness statement that there had been problems with your deployment from quite early on, and you describe being followed at least once on foot and once in your vehicle. Can I just explore those incidents with you briefly? They happened presumably between the sort of summer of 1990 and the end of 1990, did they?
I can't recall exactly when they were.
Right, well, if your earliest reports that we found are 7th of August of 1990,
right, yeah.
and certainly by March of 1991 you were gone,
Yeah.
it's likely to have been summer or towards the end of 1990. Would that be fair? Or could you
I
help?
would say towards the end, because when I got followed in the car, they had headlights on, so it can't have been the summer.
And your experience of being followed on foot, can you just describe approximately what happened and why it gave you cause for concern? I mean, obviously, cause concern because I wasn't probably expecting it. What happened, I just picked up somebody who seemed to be behind me for quite some time. He didn't know that I'd seen him, but I'd seen him. And what caused you to think that that was you being followed, sort of intentionally followed?
Just the mannerisms.
And then similarly on the incident you described when you were in a vehicle, what happened then?
I was on a motorway going home when I noticed a car behind me. So I thought I'd slow up a bit on the motorway, and this car slowed up as well. Made no attempt. So I was, say, perhaps doing 70 miles an hour, slowed down to 50, and so did this car, which raised my concern straight away.
Were you in your cover identity on
Yes.
both of these occasions, so acting in your cover
Yes.
role? And did you report those incidents to your managers?
I can't remember, to be honest.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't have reported them if you were concerned about your safety?
Well, to be honest, I didn't think it was... I mean, it wasn't... I thought it was probably another organisation rather than anybody in the BNP. And in fact, I had a close look at them in the end, and they were certainly not BNP types at all, nor was the vehicle.
Can you just explain that? When you say the vehicle wasn't a BNP type?
Well, it was a well-kept vehicle with two men, with double manned.
And that to you meant not the BNP?
Well, I can't imagine. No, it certainly, there was nothing in that signal that had anything to do with the right wing.
So did you put that one to one side as a possible
I found it amusing to be
risk? You, I think, have since giving this witness statement recalled a further incident involving a conversation with your local branch contact and David Bruce.
Yes.
Can you explain what happened there and whether it gave you cause for concern?
Yes, I was with a member of... It was at the Whites for Rights March. David Bruce was there. And he saw me with a chap from Loughton. And he called this chap over, not me. And he was sort of sticking his finger up his nose and jabbing him a bit, and I could see him looking at me at the same time. And when this chap got back, I said, "What was that all about?" And he wouldn't give me an answer and looked a bit sheepish or bewildered.
And what did you take from that?
I took that possibly that Dave Bruce thought that I might be a police officer.
And Why did you come to that conclusion based on that? Were you generally concerned about compromise?
Yes,
Were you apprehensive about what the BMP might do if they thought you were a police officer?
very much so, yes.
What did you think they might do?
Beat the shit out of me.
Did you report this incident to your managers?
No.
And can I ask why not?
Yes, because I thought the way that this person had been, Dave Bruce may have been informed, they wouldn't have believed it.
I'm going to ask you some questions now about a section in your witness statement. I'm going to ask that it's brought up on the screen, please. Page 28, paragraph 148. When I ask you these questions, HM56, please bear very carefully in mind that the identities of all of the officers referred to in this paragraph of your
For the third time today, and I hope the last, there must be no disclosure or publication made of information stated during the hearing between 4:02 and 4:04. 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. HM56, before we broke, you were explaining that after your SDS deployment had ended, it appeared to you that information had gotten around that the reason for the end, the rather abrupt end of your short deployment, was that you weren't up to the job. And I was asking you, how did you feel about that appearing to be what had been said?
I thought it was a low blow, it was unnecessary. I mean, I personally injured by it, and briefly I was, but I knew that I'd do a good job wherever they put me, and that would be forgotten about fairly quickly.
In your witness statement, you describe a couple of unpleasant months at work during which you were treated with some disdain by some colleagues.
Yeah.
I think you want to clarify which colleagues that was. Was it from your SDS managers?
No, not at all. No. I ended up on the desk that was run by one of the nastiest DIs Special Branch had ever produced, and he quite enjoyed sticking the boot in every opportunity he could.
And was the boot along the lines that you've just described, that you weren't up to the job?
Sort of, or comments like, "I hope you do a better job here. I hope you're up to it." That sort of underhand rubbish, really. I asked him for, advice one day, about how to approach something, and he said, "Well, you're Mr. Big I Am. You should know how to do it." That was about the most advice I got from him.
It may be obvious, but did you feel supported by the management at the end of your deployment?
No.
Did you get any idea how that idea came to be in circulation outside of the SDS? The idea that you hadn't been up to the job?
Yeah, they put it about, no doubt. There had to be an explanation, so I think they didn't want it to reflect on them. I think that people would have agreed, had they known my circumstances of let's call it an argument with them, that they wouldn't have been supported.
And so did you take it that they considered the higher interest to be protecting the unit rather than protecting you?
No.
You didn't think that?
No, I think they were just covering their own rear ends. But,
as to your welfare more generally, you say in your witness statement that you weren't aware of any deliberate process for monitoring your welfare. Were you aware of any informal monitoring, or just none really at all?
None really at all.
You also describe in your witness statement, again, I'm not going to ask you for the name or any details of the individual, but you describe some informal mentoring with a mentor before you were deployed. Do you remember that?
I'm not sure which one we're talking about.
Right, let's have a look. It may be that we can't take this much further, but
Okay,
let's have a look at page 25 of your witness statement, please.
Right.
Paragraph 135. There are redactions to the paragraph. I can't help you beyond that, and it's why I'm not asking you for a name or identity. But you said, I did have informal mentoring with my mentor prior to being deployed.
Yes.
And then I did not see him during my deployment.
Right.
Do you recall that informal mentoring?
Yes.
Was it useful to you?
Yes.
Why did it not continue during your deployment? Was that expected or unexpected?
Just no opportunity. No, wasn't relevant. There was a number of years had passed, so there was no need. Things had changed anyway.
I'm going to just ask you this: yes or no? Did you think the mentoring was effective?
Yes, any help was any good help was effective. Yes.
after the end of your deployment, so not during your deployment but afterwards, again, you say in your witness statement there was no welfare support for you. Let's bring it up. It's page 29 of the witness statement.
Yep.
Sorry, paragraph 161. Oh, sorry, it's my page numbering again. Thank you. You said there was no welfare or support for me as a former UCO. With hindsight, it was not adequate for my needs, although I was able to quash any rumours about my deployment.
Yep.
You say it was not adequate for your needs because does that mean you considered that you could have used some support?
I don't know, really, to be honest. I don't know. You know, who knows? I might have benefited or not. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't crying myself to sleep every night, if you get what I mean. It was, and I wasn't murderous, you know. So
I'm just trying to understand what you meant when you said it was not adequate for your needs. What would you like to have seen that would have made it adequate?
The truth, basically. Somebody telling me the truth.
Concerning the circumstances at the end of your
yeah.
deployment. So when you say you were able to quash any rumours, again, do you mean rumours surrounding the circumstances?
Yeah, so somebody confronted me about, I'd say, would you like to hear my side of the story? And it was like, oh, no, no.
All right, so you felt that nobody wanted to listen to your side of how things had ended?
Well, that's for sure, yeah.
You answered a number of questions earlier in regard to the managers within the SDS. I just want to follow up on a couple of points in relation to those. The issues that HM109, DIHM109, had regarding Stefan Scott. Can I just ask you, please, about a particular section of your witness statement?
Yeah.
Page 28, paragraph 147. At the top of the page. You gave some evidence earlier about an interaction between HM109 and Martin Gray.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you about is what you say here about his interactions with the undercover officers. So you say that he was concerned with the direction the unit had taken, and that complicated a lot of his interactions with UCOs.
Basically, Stefan Scott was another sort of very popular officer in Special Branch, and he took that with him to the SDS. So when this affair broke, there were supporters and there were detractors of Stefan Scott.
And those who were supporters of Stefan Scott, I'm not going to ask you, firstly, I'm not asking you names, did you know who they were? Was it obvious to you?
Not really, no.
When you say then that HN9's interactions a lot of his interactions were complicated, was that with the supporters, the detractors of Stefan Scott, or just generally with the UCOs?
I think that people felt that that anything he did, it was as though that he was performing a witch hunt, if you get what I mean. That now he was after you, type thing. That's the impression I got. And
it was that which complicated his relationships?
Yes, I think so, yeah. This perception that he was now after everybody.
You say there in your statement his intentions were probably good, but he just came across as dismal and gloomy.
Well, very much so, yeah.
When you say his intentions were probably good, can you just expand a bit? What do you mean by that?
Yes.
Sorry, H, but it's my fault entirely. I'm just being asked to clarify. The transcript has shown up as if I'm saying HN9. I'm talking about HM109 for the avoidance of any doubt.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. So my question was what
Yes,
you
he
meant by his
just wanted
intentions were
to make sure that other people were not in any way emulating the behaviour of Stephen Scott.
and that you took to be good intentions.
Very much so.
You mentioned in passing, and I didn't ask you in detail earlier, the management, something about the management style of DIHN 86, who took over as the detective inspector. In your witness statement, you describe him as a micromanager. Can you explain why you used? Do you want it on the screen? It's page 24, paragraph 127. HN 86 was a micromanager.
Yeah, I understand. Maybe micromanager is not. He was. I just got the impression that he didn't believe anything, and that he wanted to see it plainly, prove it, for himself, that what I was saying.
So believe anything that you were saying,
Yes.
you mean? Did you consider that to be personal to you, or did you observe him being suspicious about what other undercover officers were
I'm
saying?
not sure. I can't say for certain, but I do think he had a close look at somebody else. I'm not sure.
You've already explained that he came to your cover address. You also describe here that he visited the pub where you were based. Is that the
Yeah.
pub in Loughton?
Yeah.
So that's the pub where you were
Yeah.
you were frequenting it in your cover identity.
Yes. Yeah.
And he attended as your detective inspector, did he, whilst you were in that pub?
Yes.
Was it a pre-arranged meeting?
I went with him. He was with me in the car.
And
What was the cover? How I was going to explain his presence.
what I was going to ask you, you suggest here it was a dangerous thing to do.
Yes.
Did you express that to him before going to the pub together?
Not really. I mean, he is what he is. He's a detective inspector. He knows what he's doing.
But you considered it to be dangerous.
Yep.
Did you express that to him at any stage?
Not really. No.
And again, what did you understand to be his purpose in coming to that pub?
To see if I did have actual contacts.
Did you think maybe there was some suspicion on the part of the management? Because I think at the beginning of your deployment, you spent quite a lot of time just, as it were, just going to the pub, going to the paper where the papers were sold, and not reporting very much at the beginning. Do you think that's what gave rise to their suspicion, their concern?
Yes, I think the lack of product prompted him. He wanted to make a mark, I think, having come back to the unit.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to two final topics, please, before I finish the main part of my questioning. The first topic I'm going to ask you about, HM56, is littered with the names and ciphers of officers who have full anonymity. So I'm going to just lead you around some of these questions.
Could you put the microphone back up, please? Oh, you knocked it down accidentally.
Sorry, thanks.
No, don't worry.
Can we have up on the screen, please, page 4, paragraph 12 of your witness statement? And you say there, I noticed that's the deployment, had a profound effect on my colleagues. 2 left the MPS immediately after their SDS deployments and moved abroad. I recall that HM101 was one of them. Right. HM101 has a restriction order over their real name. Have you managed to identify who it is? Not necessarily with reference to HM101, but what sort of profound effect or effects did you notice on other former undercover officers?
Well, with HN4, he took to drink. And
I'm just going to pause you and ask you some directed questions about HM4. You, I think, later on, after you had finished your SDS deployment and HM4 had finished his SDS deployment, and I'm not going to ask you the precise circumstances, but you came across him in other special branch work, is that right?
Yes.
And when you came across him, you noticed then that he had taken to drink, as you
Yes.
put it. Had you been aware of that at any earlier stage?
Yes.
When you noticed that he had taken to drink, did you notice that he was drinking during work hours?
Well, it was obvious he got into trouble.
When you say he got into trouble, again, I'm going to lead you, so please just wait for my question.
Yes.
Were you aware that he was arrested for drink driving during the course of his SDS deployment, yes or
Yes.
no? After he was arrested for drink driving during the course of his undercover deployment, did he carry on with his undercover deployment?
I really can't recall the sequence of events.
Right, I won't push you on it just because of I don't want to
Yeah.
lead you into a tricky restricted area. But you were aware of an arrest for drink driving whilst he was deployed.
I think he did
Undercover.
continue. Yes, I'm sure he did continue. He did. And I was astonished that he was allowed to.
Can you describe, again, not necessarily with reference
Yeah.
to HM4, but why were you astonished?
Well,
By that.
because he was arrested for drink driving. It's like
What would you have expected to happen to an officer arrested for drink driving?
to be withdrawn from a unit immediately.
Was it apparent to you at that stage that HM4 had difficulties with alcohol?
No.
It later became apparent to you, and you seem to associate that or consider that to be an impact of his SDS deployment. Is that what you're saying essentially?
Yes, a presumption, yes.
Other than alcohol, did you observe any other profound effects on HM4?
He was a different character, to be honest. He wasn't the young man that I knew. He was different.
Can we just bring up, please, paragraph 138, page 26 of your witness statement? And you cite there a mistake in the management. So you say management of the SDS was well directed, but mistakes were made. For example, with HM4, when he was supported to stay in the SDS, when I
Yeah.
believe he should have been removed. Is that a reference to the
Yeah.
drink driving? Can we just move down to paragraph 146 on page 27, please? Paragraph 146, just the bottom, please, of the page 27. Thank you. All right, you say there, you believe he went to court, pleaded guilty, and then you say he, HM4, may have told you that John Dines and another, please don't mention the other, were the self-appointed court of the Star Chamber that took him to task over this, but he was nonetheless allowed to continue. Were you conscious of John Dines taking a position, as it were, vis-a-vis HM4?
Yes.
And did that come to you only through what HM4 told you, or did you
I was
observe
there.
anything?
I was there.
When you say John Dines and another were the self-appointed Court of the Star Chamber, can you explain what you mean by Court of the Star Chamber?
Well, basically, they wanted to. They asked the management to leave the room, and they were interrogating HN4 over his behaviour, and it wasn't just the drink drive.
I'm just going to pause you there.
Yeah.
So they asked the management to leave the room.
Yes.
Is that at one of the meetings?
Yes.
And did the managers simply obey that?
Yes.
Did they not make any attempts to ask what was going on?
I think they knew,
Why do you think they knew?
because the way they disappeared out of the room.
And were you in the room when it took place?
Yes.
Were other undercover officers in
Yes.
the room when it took place? And when you say they took him to task, do you mean they were critical of HM4?
I wanted an explanation as to his behaviour, not just the matter of the fact that he was drink driving. There was another issue with the arrest.
So to do with I'm not going to ask you the precise circumstances, but to do with the precise circumstances of his arrest.
Yes, it's because it was a very unprofessional thing to have done.
How did HM4 seem when being taken to task?
Embarrassed, confused about why. My own view was that he had enough on his plate. He didn't need his colleagues giving him a hard time over it. Perhaps there should have been, in my view, a more supportive attitude towards him. Because clearly, if I can explain, okay, he got arrested for drink driving. How many times had he done it before? It's never once, in my opinion. That's just the time they get, when they get arrested. That doesn't mean to say that's the first time that guy's done it. So I would have taken the position that you're off, mate, and we'll talk about this. But you have to presume that can't be the first time. So, in other words, there's something going on that the management don't know about.
So this wasn't your idea of the correct way to deal with HM4?
Certainly not, no.
Can I just ask you again, I'm not asking you for names at this stage, but we see here John Dines as one of the officers who acts in this way. And you previously described him as someone who might exaggerate to get glory, who might be interested in that side of things. Were there other officers like that within the SDS at the time you served?
There was one, yes.
All right. Can I ask, I'm not going to ask you to say anything, can you have a look at the cipher list and write down the person's cipher so that I can decide whether or not to ask you who it is?
Yes.
Can you show the chairman first before you show me, please? Thank you. I'm just going to pass. I'm not going to ask you at this stage, all right? If I am able to later, once the lawyers have looked at it, I will. But so John Dines wasn't alone. There was another who you would put in that category. Just one discrete question in relation to HM4. It's not evidence that HM4 himself has provided to the inquiry. Do you understand? It's come from one of the management staff. The inquiry has received a suggestion that HM4 may have been beaten up by police after he was arrested. Did you ever hear anything like that?
Never heard that.
All right, and finally, on this question, again, I'm going to lead you through it. I'm not going to ask you for a name, and I'm not going to ask you for a nominal. But I was notified that you wanted to make an addition to your witness statement to say that there was another former SDS officer who you came across after their deployment had ended. And it was clear that they too had been negatively affected by their deployment.
Yes.
So other than HM4, and other than HM 101, there was a third officer who you noticed had been negatively affected.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Final topic, HM 56, from me. I want to ask you about paragraph 30 of your witness statement, please, page 7.
Yes.
Right. I'm not going to ask you, because you'll see there's a redaction, what post you were performing exactly at this time. Do you see?
Yes.
But this was at a time after your SDS deployment. Is that right?
Yes.
A former SDS officer came and tried to obtain a copy of his covered driving licence from when he was deployed. That's what I want to ask you about. Mm-hmm. I think you've notified, since this inquiry began hearings this month, that was in fact the officer with the nominal HN16. I can give you his real name. It's James Thompson, known undercover as James Straven.
Yes, that's correct.
The inquiry will hear about that deployment in its next tranche, all right? So the evidence isn't already there, but I'm going to just ask you a couple of questions about this incident. You say that he was trying to obtain a copy of his covered driving licence from when he was deployed. Do you remember whether that was a driving licence in the name James Straven, which was his official cover name?
I don't know what name the driving licence was in.
When he came to try to obtain a copy of his covered driving licence, was he, to your knowledge, in possession of any other cover documents in his cover name?
No, I don't know anything about that.
When you say it was for nefarious purposes, what do you mean? What did you understand?
Well, I mean, there's only one that's... Well, I can't imagine an honest reason for doing so.
At the end of your deployment, had you been asked to hand back any cover identity documents that you obtained?
I can't remember, but they at all.
But as far as you were concerned, there was no legitimate purpose
Absolutely not.
to be in possession of cover documentation after your deployment had ended?
Indeed not, no.
Did you report this attempt to anybody in the SDS or the management chain for the SDS?
Oh, no, it didn't come like that. I was told this. You know, this guy's coming to where I was working, and it was, oh, yeah, I know him, you know, yeah. Do you know why he's coming? No. And then I was told. I was horrified. I couldn't even believe that he was being put where he was put, to be honest.
I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
You say you were horrified
Yeah.
upon learning of this. Did you at that point, either yourself or cause somebody else to, ensure that the SDS management or supervisory chain was aware?
From what I understand,
attempt?
how this came about, from what I understand, was that the DVLA got in contact.
I'm just going to pause you there. I'm not going to ask you about the details of how it came to light.
It
I
came
just want
backwards.
Are you saying that you thought that they would already know?
Oh, for sure.
Were you aware, excuse me, that in 2001 to 2002, managers in the SDS had conducted an investigation into HN16's conduct as an undercover officer?
No.
Were you aware that he obtained multiple driving licences during the course of his deployment that were not sanctioned?
No.
Were you aware, when you learnt of this attempt to obtain a driving licence, that he had been removed from the SDS?
No, I didn't. I didn't know when he started or when he stopped on SDS. All I knew that when he came, I was given this information.
So in your witness statement, you refer to him as an ex-SDS officer.
Yeah.
Are you saying you didn't in fact know whether he was on the SDS or off the SDS?
Well, he was obviously off, but I couldn't tell you when he was off and what he'd been doing in the interim before coming to me.
Were you aware of how his SDS deployment came to an end?
No,
Are you aware of any other, or did you become aware of any other examples of former SDS officers seeking to obtain copies of cover documentation?
certainly not.
You mentioned that I'm not going to ask you for details of the role that he performed at this stage, but your view was that the role that he took up after being on the SDS was not a suitable one for him. Is that right?
Absolutely, but I mean, being a police officer wasn't suitable either as far as I was concerned.
And was that simply based on the attempt to obtain the driving licence?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That completes the questions from me, but as you're aware, sir, there does now need to be a
Yes.
break. I've received some suggestions in the breaks that we've had, but there ought to be a further break.
Of course.
To sweep up, please.
Do we need the full 15 minutes for that purpose, do you think?
I expect we may, yes.
Yes, very well. Then I'm not quite finished yet, but almost there.
So,
15-minute break.
So I've received a number of suggestions. I will ask some of the questions that I've been requested to ask,
Yes.
but Mr. Menon has an application to make to you, sir, in relation to questions I have refused to ask.
Yes. Mr. Menon.
So this is an application under Rule 10.4 of the inquiry rules to ask this witness a few questions. The issue I wish to ask about is the nature and extent of SDS infiltration of the British National Party and other far-right groups and racist criminal gangs. This issue
of BNP
and other far-right groups and racist criminal gangs. This issue is, as I'm sure you appreciate, of particular interest to Richard Adams, Nathan Adams, and Dwayne Brooks, who I represent, and is squarely, we submit, within the inquiry's terms of reference, given it concerns the motivation for and the scope of undercover police operations in practice. It is also of particular importance to another non-state core participant who I represent, the Friends of Freedom Press, whose premises in Whitechapel, as you know, sir, were firebombed by fascists in 1993 and again in 2013. I'd be more than happy for my learned friend to ask the questions, but she says she won't, and hence my application.
Yes. I refuse your application. I will explain very briefly, in words that I will not add to, why. The inquiry has made public and will make public the fact that right-wing organizations were infiltrated by the SDS between the 1980s and the closure of the unit. That is all that is going to be said about right-wing infiltrations, subject to the open evidence which is given, such as that which we have heard today. But I'm afraid that no questions may be asked about any other issue within that topic.
Very well.
Thank you. Can we have the witness back then, and I will ask the questions that remain.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. HM56, I've got a handful of questions arising from applications by other core participants. They are, I'm going to jump around topic-wise, so bear with me. The first question is this, and I'm asking you only for a yes or no answer to this question, please. When you were deployed, your cover name was Alan Charles Nicholson, and you say that you were known by Nick. Was Alan Charles Nicholson the identity of a real person?
No.
I'm going to ask you now about your evidence concerning the BMP in Loughton. I think you said, I'm paraphrasing, but that they weren't a violent group in particular, the Loughton branch. Did you become aware during your deployment of other branches or areas of the BMP that were violent?
No.
So, for example, in South East London?
No, I didn't even know one existed in South East London.
Can I ask, just go back to the topic of overtime, which we touched on briefly. Can we start, please, by bringing up on screen MPS 0743971? You won't necessarily have seen this before, HM56, but it is a document the inquiry has retrieved from police archives concerning, as you'll see on the first page, squad overtime, year 89 to 90. Do you see that? And
Yeah.
what we appear to have are amounts of overtime on the first page by week ending, but they're monthly amounts by the looks of it.
Yeah.
And we see a total squad overtime for 89-90, so it's Feb 89 to Feb 1990, of £175,017. And if we just take away the zooming in on that page, please, and look at the second page, there is an entry on the second page concerning you, which suggests an overtime payment of £1,257.19. Do you see that? So that would be 89.90. So when you went into the back office, rather than when you were deployed.
No, it must have been when I was deployed.
Well, February 89 to February 1990 was not a period when you were deployed, was it?
Well, I couldn't have earned that money in the back office.
Were you doing anything to earn overtime in the back office?
Not that I can recall. No.
Perhaps if we look at another document which covers a later period, 0743970, please. Oh, thank you. So you have this document at B6 in the hard copy bundle, but it might actually be easier to see it on screen. All right, can we just zoom in on the top of the first page for a moment? So we see here, this is year from February 1990 to February 1991. So that undoubtedly covers a period when you were deployed, doesn't it,
Yep.
HM56?
Yes. Yep.
And if we scroll down, please, on that page, around the middle of the page, we see entries for you, and it appears, it's not always terribly easy to understand, but it looks like monthly entries, hours of overtime, 95, 82, 94, 104. Do you see those?
Yeah.
Does that sound about right to you?
Yes.
So that many hours of overtime per month?
Yes.
And the pay, if we read it correctly, appears to suggest you were receiving something like either £1,000 or £900 in the first few months, up to £1,200, £1,400 a month in overtime. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
That was quite a significant amount of money, wasn't it, in
Yes, huge,
1990?
yeah.
But that doesn't surprise you in terms of the sort of overtime payments made?
No.
Given the amount, are you quite sure that it didn't act as an incentive?
If it had been an incentive, I would have stayed on.
Thank you. We can take those down. I've been asked just to follow up on a couple of things you said about the HM4 and the Star Chamber.
Yeah.
You described the managers leaving or being asked to leave the room and leaving. Was there no protestation from them, the managers, no suggestion that they didn't want to leave?
I know it sounds very formal, but it may have been they just stepped out for a cup of coffee, if you get what I mean. You understand what I'm saying? It wasn't like, oh, you two can, we're going to have a chat. It wasn't quite like that. It was, I think they knew what was going to happen. That's my view. I think the two principal colleagues may have let them know their disgust at the lack of professionalism by HM4.
So the colleagues, i.e. the undercover officers who confronted HM4, may
Yeah.
have let the managers know in
Yes.
advance.
Yeah.
And can we just be clear, in particular, the managers that you are speaking about, no names, did it include Detective Chief Inspector Gray, whose name I can use?
Yes.
Did it include Detective Inspector HN86?
I think so, yes.
So rather than Detective
Rather
Inspector
than
HM109?
Yeah.
Were there any other managers, detective sergeants, say, who you recall either being present or stepping out?
No, I can't recall.
And do you have any idea why, if it was considered that HM4 had shown a lack of professionalism, this wasn't being dealt with by the managers themselves?
I thought it was, if you know what I mean. This was more of a how could you do it type inquiry as to, rather than you did it and this is what's going to happen. It was how could you do it?
Another question, please. Another topic. I asked you some questions. Well, I asked you several questions about Stephen Scutt and what you heard had gone on in relation to him. And do you recall we looked at a passage in your witness statement where you described understanding that he'd gone to live under a bridge or something to that effect? How did you hear that sort of detail about what had happened to Stephen Scutt?
I honestly don't recall who told me or how I came to it.
Somebody told you. Somebody
Somebody
else
must have
told
told
you.
me. Yeah, well, for sure. Yeah, it was. I didn't read it, anything like that. It was.
And was it? Can you say whether it was told to you by someone in management or a fellow undercover officer? Can you make that distinction?
So I can't. I don't recall really.
Another topic. The meeting at which you were asked to attend a BMP meeting in East London that you
Yes.
refused to do at the end of your deployment. And you described the managers, it was Detective Chief Inspector Gray and Detective Inspector HN86, asking you to carry on with your deployment and not to leave it. Can you describe, in particular, DIHN86's approach at that meeting? What was his manner in asking you to stay on?
He was flabbergasted that I was going to jack it in, literally.
Was he polite to you? Did he express any anger? Did he seem upset? Can you give us a feel?
To be honest, the mood I was in, I wasn't particularly happy. I don't think I would have picked that up. I was determined and resolute in what I was going to do, and excuse the language, but sod them both.
Was HN86 an officer who you considered to be prone to sort of outburst, to anger, or to raised voices or anything of that nature?
No.
Was he somebody who you ever heard using racist language or terminology?
Certainly not, no.
You said when you were giving evidence earlier that if you had heard sexist behaviour, you would have challenged it.
Yes.
How would you have challenged it? And I'm talking about during the course of your SDS.
Sorry, on the
Service.
in the SDS?
Yes, whilst you're in the SDS.
Well,
How would you have gone about challenging it?
in the SDS, I don't know. I just couldn't imagine it arising in the SDS. It wasn't that sort of environment.
Was it the sort of thing that you would have reported to your managers?
Certainly not, no.
Why not?
Well, I just wouldn't have done that. It's something I would have dealt with myself.
But did you not think that managers might be interested in the use of that sort of language by the officers under their command?
I didn't know the managers well enough to make it, to be able to tell you whether that'd be true or not.
When I asked you whether others would have considered you someone who would challenge that sort of language,
Yes.
you said that yes, they would have done.
Yes.
Can I ask you what your basis was for saying that?
Because I think because I was a late joiner, I was not moulded by the Metropolitan Police like a young man can be when they join at 18. I was working in industry or a large organisation, whatever you want to call it, in a foreign country. So my, if you like, late formative teens were dealt with in that way, not being in a police culture. I mean, I could give you an example. I mean, there were. No, I can't. Sorry.
Can I ask you this? You draw a distinction between yourself and somebody who was moulded, formed
Yep.
by being
Yep.
a police officer from a young man.
Yeah.
Do I take it from that you your view was that those who had grown up in that way within the force would be less likely to challenge that sort of behaviour than you were.
Even less likely to recognise it in some respects, as it can be in certain instances as the norm.
And was that your experience
No, never.
of the Metropolitan Police Service?
No. I was fortunate, very fortunate into where I went as a probationer and stuff like that. But equally, I was treated differently. I'll give you a swift example. When I turned up at the police station where I started, the station officer kissed me on both cheeks. He said, "My God, you look like a policeman." Thank God for that. Because he'd been dealing with 18-year-olds. He said it was like a sixth form at school.
Did you perceive that there was anybody else on the SDS? Again, I'm not asking for names in the first instance. Anybody else on the SDS, officer or manager, who you viewed as being similar to you in this respect? So somebody who would call
Yes.
out or
Oh,
challenge.
yeah. Very much so, yeah.
And was that the majority of people, the minority?
I don't recall them all, if you excuse me. And I wasn't, because there was turnover, I can't say, but the ones that I became more friendly or accustomed to, yes, they would have done, yeah.
Can I ask that you write down on a piece of paper
Sure.
the nominals of the people who you're thinking of?
Yeah.
Who say they would have done that.
Even if there's, yeah, okay, I'll carry on.
Yeah, please just write them all down,
Yeah,
and then I will come to a decision either now or with the benefit of a bit of time as
Yeah.
to whether we can say them all.
Okay.
Can I just be clear, you've written down those who you would consider to be likely to call out that sort of behaviour?
Yes, indeed, yeah. I mean, there may be one or two, maybe one that's on there that I wasn't with, but I respected him so much that I would have said he would have done.
Right, so I'm just going to read those that I'm confident have no restriction over either their real name or their cover name. I'm going to say you've written down HN10 Robert Lambert on that list.
Yes?
You've written down HN25. You've written down HN90 on that list. As to the others, sir, we'll take that list away. There may be some more that we can refer to later.
There are, but I agree.
Yes.
Doing it in slow time is sensible.
Yes, thank you. I will make arrangements behind the scenes so that that appears on the transcript if we can. Final question, please, and again, I will guide you, so please keep your answers brief. The inquiry has received some evidence from HM109, DI HM109, that in connection with the Scott affair, 3 officers in particular were essentially supporters of Stefan Scott, and he describes them as a cabal. And those
Yes.
3 officers are John Dines, Robert Lambert, and HN8, if you need to remind yourself.
Yeah.
Did you see those 3 officers, or were you aware of them being referred to as a cabal in that way?
Not Bob Lambert, no. But the other two, yes, I've mentioned, I'd put those together.
Thank you. Those are all the questions.
I'm afraid you've had rather a longer day than I had anticipated. Thank you for sticking it out. I'm grateful to you, as to all witnesses, for assisting me in my task.
My pleasure.
We will resume tomorrow at 10, when, if all goes to plan, we will hear from Lindsay German.